Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today for a really special edition of Deborah Kobylt Live. I have a wonderful, inspiring woman in studio with me today, Diane Shader Smith. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
You're an incredible woman. I've been speaking to her over the past few days about a book that she's here to talk about that her daughter wrote, Mallory, Salt in My Soul, An Unfinished Life. And I'm actually going to let you take it from the top. What is this book about? And why did you decide to have this published? It's amazing.
Mallory wrote 2,500 pages over 10 years, from the time she was 15 until she passed away at 25. And I always knew that she was an amazing writer. I knew it from her professors at Stanford. I knew it from her high school English teachers. And I knew it from the writing that she had done professionally. But I was really blown away by how articulate she had been in her journal and how many insights she had to share. So I went through and pulled the ones I thought were most relevant.
Now let's back it up a little bit. At the age of 3, Mallory was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And she was, when you look at her, she seemed like she was just like any ordinary girl, right? She loved to go to the beach. She loved the water. That's why I love the cover of this. She's standing on her head at the beach, and her knees are covered with sand, and she just looks very, very joyful here. And it's interesting that you chose this as your cover. And same with the back cover. But this time in the back, she has, you can see that she's probably at the doctor in or in a hospital, but also on her head. And she wrote all of this at the age of 15, right? Until the day she passed away at the age of 25. So for 10 years,
yes,
she wrote all of this incredible material. I sectioned off some areas in the book, and I would like to read one that you actually pointed out to me earlier. Can I?
Yes.
There's a lot that I love in here, and we each were picking out different parts too, right?
Yes.
Your daughter loved to read, and she wrote this on page 6, very early on in the book. I read because there are a lot of things I can't do. I'll never be like the characters of On the Road, picking up and hitchhiking across the country on a whim, living off of cheap liquor commodities and sleeping wherever there's no law against lying down. But through the eyes of the character Sal, I got to see the beauty and spontaneity and sheer emptiness of wandering forever and never settling down roots. I read because I want to see things in my head that aren't actually there. I want to know about emotions that I've never felt before, or that maybe if I do feel them, they'll be recognizable. That's just amazing. She was so intuitive of not just her feelings, but that everything that was going around her. She's an amazing writer. This is outstanding to me. When you first went into her computer and saw all of these writings, what went through your head?
What went through my head was that I couldn't believe she was able to write for so long with such discipline during so many health challenges and all of the curveballs that life threw at her. She had a pulmonary embolism. She had a lot of hemoptysis where you cough blood. She had 67 hospitalizations, with each one ranging from weeks to months. And yet, despite all of that, she also played 3 sports in high school and played club volleyball at Stanford. Despite all that, she managed to articulate exactly what her life was like, and she wrote it as if she knew that she wasn't going to make it and that her words would help others. It's quite inspiring.
It's absolutely, it's tear-jerking, though, because as I read it, and I'm a mother of 3, I find it gut-wrenching to read her words, knowing that as her mom, you're living through her words in these pages. And again, as you said, there's so much more. This is just what you selected.
Yeah.
I want to take it back also. You were mentioning Stanford. I think it's quite interesting that there was a time where, what did you call it? An invisible illness. Mallory looked just like the rest of us, and she needed some time off, right, to get a treatment. Could you tell me about that? Because, you were able to change sort of the way that they look at things, take time off for illness.
Well, if you look at the cover that you called attention to with Mallory standing on her head at the beach, I took that picture in the summer of 2016, in August. She passed away in November of 2017, and she looks completely healthy there, and yet she was incredibly sick at that time. And the concept of invisible illness is something she writes a lot about, and it's something that so many can relate to because it doesn't just apply to cystic fibrosis when you're not tethered to any machines or any oxygen or IVs. But if you have diabetes, or if you have hearing loss, or if you have gastrointestinal problems or diabetes, so many conditions and diseases are invisible, and she writes quite prolifically and profoundly about them. And I think that the reason why I wanted people to read her writing is because she does share great insights that people will be able to resonate with. And the other thing is that when you ask me, when you mention that it's a tearjerker, it is a tearjerker, but there's so much joy within her life.
Absolutely. By that I mean as a mother. Reading it as a mother, I thought, first of all, outstanding writing. That's what grabbed me initially. This woman is such a prolific writer. She's just outstanding. But getting back to Stanford, because I know that you were able to sort of, or she was able to sort of change the view on even, giving person a time off.
Oh, you're talking about what happened with Spanish. Okay, so because Mallory had a condition, she was part of the Office of Accessible Education, which helps kids with special needs navigate through the system. And Mallory missed a lot of Spanish because she had so many hospitalizations, and somebody had tried, her teacher, professor, had tried to hold her back and make her take an incomplete. And if she had done that, it would have put additional pressure on her with the next quarter, or she wouldn't have been able to move on in Spanish. And she felt very strongly about taking a foreign language, and she felt very strongly that she had satisfied the requirements necessary to move on, other than the attendance. And the attendance, she felt, was discrimination because she couldn't be there because she was in the hospital. So she advocated for herself, and ultimately she did prevail, but not without a lot of effort, a lot of thought, and a lot of despair. And that's one of the reasons I chose that entry, to remind healthcare educators that those suffering with health conditions do need special needs. A lot of times people talk about the fact that people abuse the system, but Mallory didn't. As a matter of fact, she sort of went the other extreme and never was asking for any special treatment. So when she did, we took it very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that had a real impression on me. And once they understood what she was going through, I just feel like she paved the way and changed for the future for someone else who's going to have a condition or an issue that needs to be dealt with where they need time. But take me back a little bit to raising Mallory, a little girl at the age of 3 that you discover that she has cystic fibrosis, and raising a daughter who has this. What were the challenges for you and for her?
Well, if you look at pictures of her before she was diagnosed, she was always in a party dress and in patent leather shoes and wanting to dance and sing and do very girly things like have princess tea parties. But we learned from the doctors that when you exercise, it helps dislodge the mucus and it makes you healthier. And so I yanked her out of all non-athletic endeavors and put her into, back then, Little League and basketball and soccer. And ultimately in high school, she played volleyball, swam for the team, and played water polo. And in college, she played volleyball. And so what changed really was the way we pushed her in terms of her activities.
You talk about mucus. She would develop mucus in her lungs. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the condition, because of a salt problem, it doesn't allow the mucus to clear the way a normal person does. If I cough and I go, and I cough on you, your system will inevitably wash it out. Right. When you have cystic fibrosis, you end up with thick, sticky mucus in your lungs. I wrote the book Mallory's 65 Roses when Mallory was young, and in it I had a Disney animator put a picture of a kid with a tennis shoe stepping and chewing gum, and just, how the foot goes up and down and you can't get the gum off your shoe. It's the same with the mucus in the lungs. So if a person is exposed to a bacteria, it gets into the lungs of a patient with cystic fibrosis, and then they can't clear it. And then the repeated infections are what ultimately kill the children.
What did she do to clear it? You said athletics. She was very, very active. What else did you do and did she do to make sure that to clear out her lungs?
Well, every day, kids with cystic fibrosis do standard protocol treatments, which is usually the vest, which does a pounding to release the mucus. And then inhaled medications like bronchodilators, which thin the mucus, hypertonic saline, which is just sort of, I call exaggerated salt because that thins the mucus, and then other kinds of steroids, anti-inflammatories, and antibiotics, all designed to clear the mucus and the infection from the lungs.
That's an awful lot to deal with. But she lived with it, and she just lived as any ordinary child, right? I mean, she didn't ever let it get her down, certainly.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I thought it was important to publish the book, because she wanted people to know what it was like. She did not want to create any sort of a pity party when she was alive. She didn't want people to feel sorry for her, but she did struggle a lot. She didn't share it because she chose to live with her mantra, which was live happy. And so this book really kind of pulls the curtain back on what it's like to live with particularly cystic fibrosis, but any chronic condition where you have to suffer loss after loss after loss. And she writes quite eloquently about learning how to adjust to the repeated step-down prognosis that she dealt with, and ultimately how it affected her life.
So this ultimately did get her down, but she just really didn't show it publicly. It was in these pages where she released it, right? Mm-hmm. Wow. Do you have an excerpt that you want to read to us? Because there's so many, and you were pointing one or two out to me, and I want to get to the opioid excerpt later, actually. But do you have one in the meantime that you think really captures?
Well, I think
also?
if you go to the very first page of the book, where she says, I could have titled this memoir Ode to Salt, I think that is one that's worth.
Do you want to read it for us?
If you want me to, I'd be happy to.
I mean, for you to read her words is very special to me, and I know you've done this before, but I'd like to hear you read. Thank you.
Okay. I could title my memoir Ode to Salt, since salt is part and parcel of the cystic fibrosis experience. Broken proteins lead to imbalance of salt inside and out of the cells. If you kiss or lick the skin of a CFer, you'll get a first-hand taste, literally, of how fundamental salt is to the disease. CF patients lose so much salt in our sweat that we can get water intoxication from drinking normal water unless we add salt to our water and our food. And salty water helps counteract some of the worst symptoms of the disease. I will say the reason I chose the cover at the beach, and my sister is the one who titled the book Salt in My Soul, was her suggestion, which I thought was brilliant. Because being at the beach, inhaling the salt, breathing salt air, swimming in the water, all of those healing aspects of the ocean and the sea and the beach and the salt in the air really did help. And as a result, Mallory loved being at the beach because it started when she was young, before we knew about the effects of breathing hypertonic saline. I think that discovery came after she was, maybe 7 or 8.
Tell us about that. What do you mean?
They did a study and they found out that kids in Australia with cystic fibrosis did better than any other population of kids with CF in the world. And their study revealed that it was related to the salt in the water and the salt in the air. And that's why routinely now kids with CF breathe hypertonic saline, which is salty water. And we noticed it. We used to take Mallory to Hawaii just because my dad grew up in Florida and he grew up at the beach in Daytona. He took us, when we used to live in the East Coast when we were young, to Daytona, and then when we moved as a family when I was 10 to California, we would go to Hawaii for our vacation. So naturally we wanted to go with my parents and Mallory when she was young and her brother Micah. And every time we went to Hawaii, we noticed that her symptoms were better, but nobody had an explanation for it. We just thought it was the magical, mystical combination of the salt and the sea. And then when the study came out, we realized, okay, so every vacation we ever took was always at the beach.
But you live close to the beach.
We did, but it wasn't day to day. And if you were to ask me what one regret I have, it's that we didn't live closer to the beach or at the beach. But one of the other things they say is the major indicator for longevity with any chronic illness is proximity to a major medical center. And so we discussed moving to the beach when Mallory was young, but we decided that we wanted to be closer to the doctor and the hospital so that at the first symptom of anything, it was easy to run in and get a check. And Mallory lived for 25 years despite having cepacia, which is the really most deadly. She had cenocepacia, which is the deadliest of the deadly bacteria and the hardest one to live with.
And ultimately that's what she passed
from. That's what she died from, yeah.
Let's talk about phage therapy, because why don't you first explain what is phage therapy and the necessity of phage therapy? Because a lot of people just don't know enough about it. Please.
Most people know what a superbug is. It can be a hospital-acquired infection like
Right.
MRSA or staph, or it can be one of the bacteria that kids with cystic fibrosis get that don't start as superbugs, but over time, the repeated exposure to antibiotics makes them become resistant. And ultimately, we don't have treatment for superbugs. And they used to do phage research and phage therapy way back before penicillin was created. And at the time that Dr. Fleury created penicillin, that's sort of when the phage therapy in the United States stopped happening. But my husband spent a great deal of time researching options for Mallory. And in 2016, he read about a case of somebody who had lived, Tom Patterson in San Diego, and he decided that he wanted to try to get it for Mallory. And at the time, it fell on deaf ears because nobody had heard of it.
But what is it?
It is, for lack of a better way to explain it, viruses that are pulled from sewage and soil samples that attack bacteria. So it's bacteria eating viruses. That's the shortest way to explain it.
Right. And then you would...
They have to purify it, and then
Right.
they have to figure out a delivery mechanism. And there are two ways. One is inhaled and one is IV, and different researchers have different opinions. And I'll leave that to the researchers. But I will say that Mallory was the first patient in the United States with cystic fibrosis to get phage therapy. She did not get it in time. She was already deemed brain dead, which is oxygen deprivation, by the time the dose was administered. But we did learn upon autopsy that it was doing what it was supposed to do. It was efficacious. It had reached its target. Right after Mallory was treated with it, another patient was treated, and she's actually doing very, very well, which of course is heartbreaking for us. We're very happy for her, and as a result, I think several dozen patients have been treated at the two centers that are actively doing work in
Where
phage
is
therapy
that?
right now. One's in San Diego at IPATH, and the other is at Yale. And it's really promising treatment. So we're donating all profits from Salt in My Soul to charity, most of it to phage therapy. And we created Mallory's Legacy Fund at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and 100% of that is going to phage therapy. And in fact, since Mallory passed away, we've raised $165,000.
And may I say, she passed away in 2017. It hasn't even been 2 years.
No.
That's still very fresh, but yet I know that you just immediately upon her death went into action to do a lot in her name. This book, which is her book, they're her words, a documentary. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the award-winning team that made The Invisible War in the Hunting Ground, Amy Ziering
fantastic,
and
yeah.
Kirby Dick, are unbelievable documentarians.
If you haven't, you must see
If you
it.
haven't seen those things, they
A
also
must.
they also did The Bleeding Edge,
Yeah.
and they're making a documentary about Mallory's life and about her role in phage therapy and the work that my husband Mark has done to secure phage therapy. He's been working really hard. I describe it as Mark's post-Mallory mission has been to bring phage therapy to other patients. His quote, "I couldn't save my daughter, but I want to save other kids." I turned immediately to Mallory's journal and to her words. It was too painful for me initially to think that if she had gotten the treatment sooner, she would have lived. And so I've been really focusing on Salt in My Soul. And it's so unbelievable and so comforting to know that Mallory wrote a book that other people are responding to and reporting back that it's helping them emotionally.
I had so many friends. I have many friends who know that I'm interviewing you today. They live all over New York, Florida, Los Angeles, and they said, "Oh, we read this book. Please tell her. It changed me. It changed the way that I look at the disease. It inspired me, and they knew more about treatment that they never knew about. This book is touching so many people. But I wonder, when you read excerpts from it, right? Do you feel like she's here? Because I do. When I was reading it, I felt like, like that she was right there with me.
Well, the irony is
so
that Mallory
weird.
wrote because she was worried about memory, and she wanted to make sure that every single memory that she had was captured. She worried about losing her memory because sometimes the medications made her foggy, and oxygen deprivation can really hurt your memory. And it's funny because she wrote to preserve the memories initially for herself, and then ultimately she came to understand they would be helpful to others. And for me, it's the greatest gift any mother could ever get, because I get to relive her life every time I read her words, not just the 300 pages in the book, but the 2,200 other pages that I have in her journals that I still look at all the time.
Did the two of you talk a lot toward the end, where she was very sick, and I know she didn't want to die.
She didn't want to die.
Did she look at you and say, I don't want to, please help me live? I mean, what were her final days, weeks, life? I know that she passed quickly.
Well, we moved to Pittsburgh from LA to get her a transplant, and that was sort of a really difficult emotional transition initially.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was she had amazing friends, and she had an amazing boyfriend named Jack Goodwin.
I love him. He's so darling in this book.
He's amazing.
He's a great guy.
He's a great guy, and he came once a month religiously, and he actually was there for 2, I think, of the 3 dry runs, maybe even 3, and he came when she had her transplant. And all of her best friends all came and visited, and I kept a calendar. And at one point, Mallory said, "Mom, there's too many visitors. I'm too tired." And I said, "I'm sorry, but everybody wants to be here for you.
They love you, Mallory.
We're supporting you in this journey." And so even though it was very difficult to be gone, and she really wanted to live, what she wrote were very specific instructions for me that she did give me before she passed away about what she wanted when she was in the ICU after transplant, and what measures she was willing to go through in order to live. For example, she said, "I want a ventilator, I want ECMO, I want any artificial heroics necessary to keep me alive." But she didn't want to live as a vegetable. And when the doctors told us that she had been oxygen deprived for too long because the phage therapy did not arrive in time, that's when we let her go, and that was incredibly painful.
Yeah, for anyone to make. Ultimately, though, her body was unable to ward off that bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
Was she, I mean, because you get the mucus in your lung, right? Ultimately, was it difficult for her breathing toward the end? Or?
Oh, yes. And actually, Mallory is very eloquent. One of the ways she describes end-stage lung disease, she says, plug your nose, put a straw in your mouth, and then run up 3 flights of stairs, and you will know what it feels like to live with end-stage lung disease. She often described it as feeling like she was going to suffocate because she couldn't get the breath in, which we should talk about the opioids because...
I was just going to bring that up.
Yes.
I was literally just going to bring it up. It's on page 45. I was thinking this is a perfect time to bring that up. She wrote about opioids, which is we have discussions every day, right, in our own lives about opioids and the epidemic. But this is something that Mallory wrote about because she needed it. But go ahead. I'm going to find it. And go
While
ahead.
you're looking, so the crazy thing about the opioid issue when it comes to patients like Mallory, she felt very strongly that there needs to be more discussion around the opioid epidemic, because with 130 people dying every day, we clearly have a horrific, catastrophic, serious problem. And yet at the same time, when patients like Mallory, who are not at risk of addiction, go through serious things like having her chest cracked open and her old lungs taken out and her new lungs taken in, and then doctors not wanting to treat her because they're afraid she's going to become an addict, made it very difficult for her. And she felt very strongly that that doctors needed to convene, and she wanted to be part of an industry-wide conversation to figure out how to deal with the opioid epidemic, both in terms of over and under medicating. So at the same time she talks about being undertreated, she writes the passage that you're going to read.
And again, beautifully written. This is the one thing I have to tell everyone who has not read the book. This is so beautifully written. It's amazing how incredibly astute she was. She writes this in 2015. "I never thought I would say this, but I've come to love the feeling of being on opioids. It was never part of my treatment, but as my chest pain became unbearable, I needed it to breathe. With morphine and oxy, there's no pain and no sadness. I don't take pain meds when I don't need them because my pain came back last night for a little bit. And it was not that severe, but verging. So I took the smallest dose of oxy. I scared myself a little bit. A lot of time I feel normal, but sometimes when I think about things, I'm like, I want to go get some oxy and have on hand just in case I have some pain, which I think is valid. But then I wonder if it were just sitting in my drawer and if I were having a bad day, I don't want to put myself in any situation for possible abuse. So she was so thoughtful about, I need it, I want it, I'd like to have it on hand, but I don't want to become an addict. I mean, she thought all this through. I never thought I was at risk, but now I realize it can really happen to anyone. I need to be careful. And I'm happy the doctors don't want to send me home with Oxy. They say if I have pain that's that severe, I should come to the ER. It's a valid point.
But then when
She works the whole thing through her mind in one paragraph, and so well written. But this is how the whole book goes.
Yes.
She works through her own questions, you know? Go ahead.
There's a very, really profound passage that's not in the book. And in retrospect, if I were to redo the book, I would have put it in there. And it's where she writes about the fact, and this speaks to the anxiety that she developed over time, which comes from having a chronic condition and feeling completely out of control. And no matter how hard you work to stay healthy, the disease is always one step ahead of you. But she writes about the fact that she would go to the movies with friends, and she would come home, maybe that had a scary scene in it, and other friends would just let it go. She'd get into bed, and she'd say her eyelids would close, and it was as if the movie was running over in her mind. And sometimes the villain was the villain that she saw on the screen, and sometimes the villain was the villain of her disease. And she writes unbelievably profoundly about what having a chronic condition that's unrelenting and out of your control does to your mental health. And it's something that the doctors haven't really talked about. They're so concerned
With treatment.
and justifiably so,
Hope of trying to treat.
trying
yeah.
to save your life and take care of your lungs and take care of your GI tract. They're not really paying as much attention. Although I have
To the whole patient sometimes.
to the whole patient.
I understand
It's
that.
happening more now. I mean, now Mallory passed away a year and a half ago. I see a lot more happening than, compared to when she was much younger. But there are so many issues that chronically ill patients have to deal with that it's, I guess, a priority. They have to make their priority list.
How long, I mean, she was diagnosed, as we know, at 3 years of age. How much time did they give her when she was a little girl?
Well, when she was diagnosed, the doctors said to me when I was bawling my eyes out that even though she had a chronic condition, when kids in the 50s were born, they died very soon by the time they were 5. And the lifespan when she was 5 was 25. That was the approximate time. So they said, it'll get longer. Now I think it's 39 or something like that. So it's really increased with all of the treatments. And that's one of the reasons fundraising has been so important and education and awareness is important, because all of that attention has resulted in better treatments that prolong life. And unfortunately, they have not come up with a cure. And what happens is when kids have repeated exacerbations, sometimes the only hope is a transplant. But when you get a transplant, you don't get a cure. You just trade one disease for another. And having immunosuppressed lungs and really creates a whole other set of issues. So that's why we're working so hard to get phage therapy to become available. The doctors are careful to say that it's not a cure, but it can definitely stave off exacerbations and increase your time before you'll need a transplant.
I mean, so much money has to go into research of everything, right? I mean, because you said back in the 50s, the person would have lived to the age of 5, and in her lifetime to the age of 25, which I guess she hit that mark. And now, with advanced treatments, 39, that's incredible, because in not too far future, it's going to be 49 and then 59. And I hope you know that Mallory is a big part of that, and I know you know that.
Well, we raised $5 million in her life for the cystic fibrosis that was spent on different forms of research. The last 10 years, we directed it to a doctor named John LaPuma. He was doing Sapacea research and work. Before that, it was in the general fund that went to science. But right now, we're targeting all of our money to phage therapy because we believe it's the most promising.
Yeah. And where are they doing the most work with that?
Yale and San Diego.
Yale and San Diego.
Yep.
That's particularly.
Although I will say, I've given the talk that I give to promote Mallory's book 59 times all over the country.
I was going to say, you've given 59 talks, and does that include your TED Talk as well?
No.
That's wonderful. People need to look that up, because you're a terrific speaker.
Thank
and
you.
You talk about her legacy.
Yeah, she has quite a legacy.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And she writes about her own legacy in here. This is her legacy, and then you are living on to talk about it. But anyway, finish up. I was asking you about
Well,
phage therapy?
what I've learned from my 59 talks, I speak in a lot of hospitals and at medical centers and at grand rounds, and I'm surprised when a doctor hasn't heard about phage therapy, but as soon as I explain it, or Mark is there, if he's there, he'll talk about it, then they always want to know how they can bring it to their center. And then there are some doctors who know very well about it, and they're already bringing the research to their centers or their hospitals. And then there are people that are actively trying to get it. And so the plan that we're working towards is clinical trials so that the FDA, which has approved the first clinical trials since Mallory passed away, so that the work can be done that will help figure out the dosing and all of the complications. They have to decide which patients will be best served by it, which bacteria they have actual phages for it. 2 people are creating the first ever phage therapy data bank.
Wow.
They say they were inspired by Mallory's case because we did a lot of publicity when Mallory passed away because we were so distraught. And we know that had she gotten phage therapy sooner, it would have helped. So we did a lot of publicity. And now, because I've got this incredible platform with Salt in My Soul, An Unfinished Life, a book that everybody should read, it gives me a platform to speak about not only Mallory's writing, but the important work that needs to be done in the area of phage therapy.
You know, how is her boyfriend doing? I love Jack. I need to meet Jack. He made an impression on me. And I know
great.
you're still friendly with him, but he gave her so much love and hope, didn't he?
Yep, he did. And he's actually become very involved with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. He's going to be honored in November at, I think it's called LA's Finest. And he is still very much part of our family. He's having dinner with us on Saturday night because my niece is staying with us. We see him all the time. And in fact, my son Micah was moving out of his apartment, and he sublet it to Jack, who needed a temporary place to stay as he's maybe moving for a job at some point. And for right now, he's...
Did it, because you're a very optimistic person. When I was talking to you on the phone, you're just you move forward. But I'm sure there was a time where you pause and you say, why her, why us? Do you, or do you say this is why her and why us?
Oh,
Because
no. I
No.
do not say that.
Okay.
I just choose, like Mallory, which probably isn't a coincidence, to
No.
keep my grief private. That's the part of my life that I don't share. That's just something I like to deal
You were
with on
both
my own.
private in that way, isn't that?
Yeah.
But I mean, her
But I'm
mantra,
very public about everything else, and I'm very out there, and I share
yeah, but that's
a lot.
refreshing too, because her mantra, live happy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that would be your mantra. It's more like keep living, keep going. Because
Well, my mantra was no pity party, and then from that she adopted live happy, and I say to myself all the time, and to Mark and to Micah, that how tragic if we can't live happy in her absence, because she introduced that mantra, and now we need to carry that forward as part of her legacy.
yeah.
It doesn't mean to live happy doesn't mean that every minute of every day you are happy.
For anyone.
It just means that you have made the decision that that's the primary emotion that you're going to move forward with. It used to be, they say that if you expressed anger, it was good because you got it out of your system. But now the current research says that if you express anger and frustration, then it makes it worse for you. So I think you have to figure out, for some people they like to grieve publicly, for some people they like to go to grief groups and grieve privately. I actually have 3 friends who I have been in a grief group with, not a formal one with a facilitator, but just 4 of us who lost children around the same time, who live close to me. They are my rock. And in addition to my husband and my son and Jack, I have them as well.
So you're my rock, I have to tell you. I look at you and I think I want to draw from your strength. So what is next for you? I know you're working very, very hard on research. Mallory Legacy Fund through cystic fibrosis, right? So if you give, what do people do? They go to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation?
No, the saltinmysoulbook.com. Saltinmysoulbook.com website, which has information about where my talks are. It has pictures of Mallory. It has a click to donate for the Phage Therapy Fund. So it's Mallory's Legacy Fund at Cystic Fibrosis Foundation.
I'd really like to implore people to do that. Just a few of our listeners and viewers, again, Salt in My Soul, and they can look up everything that they need. They just go right there and they
If you
can find
Google
it.
Salt in My Soul, the reviews come up. my talks come up, the TED Talk comes up, where to donate, it's all
It's
there.
the donation that I'm particularly concerned with at the moment, because
saltinmysoulbook.com.
there are people who have family members or people with friends, and they just don't know enough. I did not know enough until I read this book.
Well, the beauty of phage therapy, when I was raising money for Mallory, where we raised the $5 million for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, that really was just for cystic fibrosis patients. Phage therapy has applications for anybody that has a superbug. And the one case that was successful in 2016, which was Tom Patterson, he just went on a trip and picked up a random superbug and was at death's door.
I had a superbug a year ago, and the infectious disease person, we do a lot of travel, said to me, "Do you have any idea how serious this is?" And I said, "Not really." And he said, "You have no idea how lucky you are." I had a very serious superbug. So,
well, that's why phage therapy will help everybody with superbugs.
And they're out there.
Yes.
There's more and more of them out there. They're not just in one region of the world. They're everywhere.
Well,
I got it.
Did you see the article that just came out about flies in hospitals carrying bugs? And, people go into the hospital with scrubs and then they come out and they go to the gym, and superbugs are everywhere, and you have to be very careful. And we need to come up with some new treatments, and that's why we can't say with certainty superbugs are the answer for every...
No, I understand.
I'm sorry, phage therapy is for every superbug. But what we can say is that this is a treatment that is worthy of study and needs desperately to be funded. And it needs attention and awareness. And actually, in the back of Mallory's book, Salt in My Soul, Mark writes about his experience getting phage. And then Stephanie Strathy, who's one of the phage, we call her the phage wrangler, she writes the postscript about where we are with phage therapy now.
You know what I love, because we're going to have to stop in a moment. I love her words. I have a strong urge to do something. Yeah. Could I read that,
yes.
or would you like to read that?
No, you go ahead.
We're probably going to have to end on that. But this really said to me, she knows what's happening. She hopes it doesn't and wanted to fight it. But she was writing these words to be found and to tell the rest of us. I have a strong urge to do something, to write something that will change people, that will have an infectious influence on the way they think and feel, that will last. I want to create a piece so moving that people are in disbelief. And I want it to be like handing people a pair of glasses, giving them a way of seeing something that they didn't even realize they weren't seeing. I get goosebumps just reading that. That just sums up so much of Mallory to me and what she left to me as a reader. So I want to thank you for bringing her to me. Is there anything you'd like to tell us before we finish?
I'd like to encourage people to get other people to read the book, because you say all your friends have read it, but it's very hard to get traction for a book as everybody's watching TV and Netflix and Hulu and running around.
And it's a fun read. I need people to know that. This is not the read of somebody going, "Ugh, gloom and doom." Nope. This is actually, here's what I love, because she's such a prolific, she's such an incredible writer. Anyone can enjoy her reading, someone my age. But she's a young girl talking about her life. So this is someone that a teenager could easily read this book and go, "Oh, yeah, I felt that too." I found it to be actually cheerful, and also at the same time difficult to realize that this is a girl struggling every day, yet she took the time to write these beautiful excerpts every day. Did she write every day? Pretty much.
She wrote a lot.
Yeah, pretty much. So I would suggest, it's also great for young people. This is something that should be in schools. Have you been talking to them about that?
Actually, Random House has put it as part of their academic curriculum, and it's on the website. They do think it should be required reading.
Absolutely. I think this would be terrific in high school, maybe middle school, but high school in particular.
And colleges. They're recommending it for common reads in college.
Absolutely. I mean, she went to Stanford. I'm sure that...
I'll tell you one more thing. Louisa Liu, who's a medical student at Yale, wrote to the dean of Yale Medical School and said this should be a must-read for every medical school student, resident, fellow, and attending, so that they can be better practitioners. And in fact, a lot of the doctors have said her book will change the way they practice medicine.
Yeah, and being that she's a Stanford grad, I would hope that they would step in and want to highlight Salt in My Soul and An Unfinished Life by Mallory Smith, one of their own. That would be fantastic. So thank you for joining me. I am honored that you took the time to be here. And I love your earrings, by the way. I love them. From the minute you walked in, I thought, oh, they're beautiful. So you look stunning.
Thank you. Try to cheer myself up with a little color.
Yeah. Beautiful. Anyway, thank you for being here, Diane. And please, everybody, I'm imploring you to please get the book, Salt in My Soul, An Unfinished Life. It's actually a fun, interesting, but thoughtful read. Pick it up on Amazon or anywhere that you get your books. And thank you so much for being here. Deborah Kobylt Live. We are live on Facebook. Then you can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and then if you're listening to your podcast, Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spreaker, and honestly just about everywhere. We appreciate it because you've really helped us to grow. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.